So welcome back. In the previous session, we have discussed about why database management system, database engineering, or database technology actually comes in. We have seen that there is a problem in the traditional system, like security, the data program independency, the concurrency, and all these things, right? And we have seen how database management systems sit in between the file system and the application program, and how application program actually interact with the DBMS, and in return DBMS interact with the file system. So let us move a little bit more into understanding what database is, what database management system is, and what are the advantages of database management system. Typically, the advantage will be nothing but the problem or the disadvantage that we have in the traditional systems will be nothing but the advantage of database management system. Also, we'll be seeing few users who will be using this particular database management system itself. So having said this, let us move and understand what database is. So database is a collection of interrelated data. So whenever you say database, if you say it's a collection of data, it is not a database. Please understand that it is the collection of interrelated data. There has to be some kind of relationship between the data itself. That is what database is, right? Or we can say database is nothing but a shared, integrated, computer structure that stores some kind of end user data, which are the raw facts, or the metadata, which we call it nothing but the data which provide a description of the or the characteristic of data and a set of relationship that link between the data itself. Okay, so database, let me again tell you, is nothing but a collection of interrelated data, or we can say in other word, database is a sand integrated structured, okay, that stores what we have two type end user data, which is nothing but the raw facts which are most interested, or which the data is looking by the end user, or the metadata, right? Through metadata is nothing but the data that provide a description of the data characteristic, and the relationship that link, or that link the data which is found in the database itself. Okay, so when you say database, organizing, right, a collection of data that we have. So let us take an example, like we have an accounting department, we have a sales department, we have a personal department itself. So DBMS, if you look into it, in an accounting department, we have certain set of, in an organization in accounting, we have a employees, we have a customer, we have a sales, right? We have some inventories and accounts. So these employees, customer, sale, inventory accounts are nothing but it is completely, a database itself. Now, immediately it may not be strike into your mind. Okay, once you move down, whenever you will be talking about modeling of the data and all, then you will try to understand what we are talking about, because the employee, customers, sales, inventory, these are nothing, are some kind of real objects that we are talking about, or like some kind of sales, transaction and all these things, some kind of logical thing that we are talking about. So now let us understand that database is nothing but a collection of interrelated data. So do we have some data? There has to be some kind of relationship among the data, right? And when you are talking about, in terms of an organization, an enterprise itself, so how you are organized in that particular, data itself. Okay, so this example, like in account, we have different departments and how the data has been it's been organized itself, like customer, employees and all these things, right? So now let me move into it. Now you are talking about data collection, you have data, but when you talk about database management system, so database is nothing but the data, collection of the interrelated data itself. Okay, so now when you say management system, database management system, now how you are managing that, how you are controlling the access to the database that is stored in the database is called as nothing but database management system. Okay, so database management system is nothing but a collection of set of programs which helps us in order to manage this particular data, help us to provide the access control to the data that is stored in the database itself. Okay, so it will include certain kind of tools which through which we can do some kind of manipulation of the data, like addition of the data, modification of the data, deletion of data, right? Through which through which is like some kind of queries, which queries are nothing but some kind of questions about the data that is stored in the database, and based on that particular queries we'll get some kind of information in the form of reports. That is what the database management. So it serves, this DBMS serves an intermediary between the user and the database. Like when you talk about OS, it is like bridge between the hardware, right, with the hardware and the user. Here also DBMS serve as an intermediary between the user and the database. So end user adding some kind of application represent to the DBMS, and DBMS will be moved into nothing but the database itself, right? So we are having a complete database storing some kind of employee information, customer information, sales, inventory, and account, right? And now we'll take this particular data. Okay, the query has been asked, the order, we can say the question asked from the end user, and based on that the data will be fetched up from here and it will be sent back, right? And in terms of certain terms of report itself, right? So you can see this database is the intermediary between the user and the database itself. Having said this, right, so let me revisit. So whenever you talk about database technology, it comes into two pictures. That is, one is the database, another is the database management system. Though I have in the session, I have talked about database engineering, database management system, database technology, saying that it's actually hold the same thing, right? But in more specific way, when you talk about database technology, we are talking about both the database and both the database and the database management system. So database, when you're talking about, it is nothing but the collection of the data, some interrelated data that we have, right? Yes, it's some kind of record keeping which records the data, maintain the data. Now when you talk about database management system, the primary goal is nothing but how conveniently or how efficiently we are storing, we are able to retrieve the data, we are able to modify the data itself. Okay, right? So database management system now plays a layer of abstractions between the application program and the file system that we discussed in the a previous session itself, right? So the application program will be nothing but directly interacting with the DBMS, and DBMS in turn will be the file system. So we have certain no queries which are called as some questions which are related to nothing but SQL, that the structured query language through which we are trying to retrieve, store, and modify the particular data itself, right? So now in order to do so, when you say SQL means we are nothing but we are talking about some set of programs which allows the users to access and modify the files. So let me summarize again. Like database is nothing but the collection of interrelated data itself. Database helps us to maintain and record the data itself. When you talk about database management system, now it will have a certain set of programs, and the main objective is nothing but how you are effectively the user can able to access the data so that he can efficiently retrieve and modify the data. So it is nothing but an abstraction layer which actually sits between the application program and the file system. So users of data, so database management, database administrator, he is the one who will be actually monitoring the entire data itself. So whether the database is performing well or not. So if there is some problem with the databases, will go for fine tuning the entire database itself. Okay, so as I told you in the previous, he will he will make strategies how when we need to do the backup of the data, when you do to recover the data, right? So he will be licensing with the user. That means he, who particular user, what kind of privileges, okay, access privileges has to be given, right? He will be managing the information content, then he will enforcing some security to the data, right? And he will set some rules also on what kind set of rules on that particular data itself, right? So these are the certain roles of the DBA. Typically the most what is important part is that he has to manage the data, he has to license with the users, manage, have the security, the backup, and keep on monitoring the data so that he see how the database is performing. So database designer are the one who will be actually will be designing the database, right? So how the database should look like, right? So what kind of, how the relationship exists between the the data itself. All these things will be made by the database designer. Application programmer are nothing but developers who will be one who will, through the application program, will send some queries to the database, and based on the queries will get certain data, and how will be reflecting back the data in, to the user itself. So that is the role of the application program. And end user, is the one who will keep on, interacting with the database. He'll be storing data, retrieving data, asking for some kind of reports and all these things. So having said this, the advantage of database is now you see that there is no dependency between the data and the program. So as data DBMS comes into picture, right? So DBMS is handling with the users. User in other words, he's handling with the file system. So there no kind of dependency between the data. So there is a lot of reduction in the data redundancy, right? So duplicate data will be there. Now we have more kind of security, more kind of flexibility, and it helps us in better way of sharing the data. Apart from that, in the DBMS we can have a lot of maintaining what you say, the recovery of the data itself is one very important part in the DBMS, and also the backup. So we want to take the backup of data. So if there is any kind of failure of the database itself, so we have the backup of the data which can be retrieved back, and again we can make the database live again back. So having said this, let us and it also, as I was training, annual backup and all these things, and then for some constraint are nothing but certain set of rules and alls, okay, which will be more we will going to understand when you move down the later part of the session itself, right? So these are the certain advantages of database itself. So I hope you have understood what database is. Database is nothing but collection of interrelated data, right? So that interrelated data itself, when you talk about management, we have a set up program. How will you manage this particular interrelated data through some kind where the user will be interacting with the data and will have some kind of modification, what you say, insertion, deletion, all these things of the data itself, right? So that, and then we see the users of the data like DBA, database designer, application programmers, which are developers, and the end user. And we have seen the advantage of DBMS in terms of there is data independence, reduction of data redundancy, better security, flexibility, way of data sharing, backup recovery, and in front some kind of constraint that helps uh, some set of constraint or some kind of limitation or rules which help us in maintaining the database itself. So I hope this database management system is the idea what database management system is clear.